The money part, all yours.
Okay, while people are still getting settled, I am the chairman of the Old Dominion Hop Cooperative, and I do want to talk a little bit about that. Some of the items that Steve mentioned earlier, we really have organized pretty well, not only in Virginia, but Maryland and North Carolina. I'm going to show you a little bit of that. I'm also co-owner of Huguenot Hops, just outside of Richmond, Virginia. And my partner and I have been growing hops for 2 years now. We've been a member of the co-op for 2.5 years. When we joined, there were about 20 members. There are over 100 members that are part of the co-op at this point. And we get probably one new membership request each week. And with our Central Virginia location, we're also doing video conferencing of our meetings. So don't necessarily feel like you need to drive to Virginia if you want to participate in a meeting. Those are going to be available online. We already talked about the 3 committees. There's a marketing committee that's really helping us promote Virginia, North Carolina, Maryland grown hops. They're working on a marketing brochure and also developing logos. So there's a lot of activity. We are recognized by the State Corporation Commission as a for-profit entity. So we have a lot of potential in the future for how we leverage the co-op. Of course, buying in bulk, we've discussed that with several different items already. As part of the Huguenot Hops, we did a Kickstarter campaign. We raised over $13,000 that allowed us to double our hop yard. So we will be growing on 2.5 acres this year. We'll have 2,500 crowns, 5 production varieties, and 3 trial varieties. At 2.5 acres, your friends don't like you anymore for harvesting. We pulled the trigger last month and we signed a contract for a Wolf harvester. It's a Wolf 140 that will be installed by Harvest this year. So Virginia, the state of Virginia will have 2 Wolf harvesters and processing facilities for pellets and packaging. So we're really starting to take those strides forward. I did want to show you a couple things about the Old Dominion Hop Co-op, the website, which does show which growers are in what areas of the state and their contact information. And also the other benefit of joining is we have a private Facebook group called ODHC. There is a public Old Dominion Hops Facebook group where there is some interaction, but a lot of the questioning back and forth, like what fertilizers are you using, when are you cutting back your plants, do you all want to get together and buy some core, all that stuff happens on the private group. So just let me show you a couple of those. So with the interactive map, I can click on it. If somebody has provided me the information for the varieties they grow and a link to their website or Facebook page, that's all on there. And if they don't have that information, it's all down in a table below. So the idea with this is not only to show how many growers and the quantity that folks are growing, but it's to allow brewers to go to this and contact the hop growers that are close to them or growers that have the varieties that they're most interested in. As was pointed out to me during the break, if you want to join, you have to go to the Contact Us tab on the website and fill out the form and then send your check into the address that is there. We will acknowledge that you submitted your request and follow up with some information, so we'll have a direct link for this in the future. We also have a tab in there about in the news, and this is part of telling the story. If you have been published or some news reporter came out to your farm to get information from you about your hops and the breweries that you're selling to, we will try to follow that, and we will post a link for it so that people can go on the Old Dominion Hop Co-op web page and they can start seeing the story and how it's growing. So I invite you to go look at that. Here in the Facebook page, the ODHC private group, not only do we have growers, but we have members of our extension agency who post data out there. Virginia Tech has developed an IPM manual. They have also developed a hop growers budgeting worksheet. All that information is posted in this group. This alone would be worth your $20 membership fee. Janine is a member of this group and she participates in it as well. So I strongly encourage you to join the co-op, whether you're North Carolina, Tennessee, Maryland, or Virginia. Become a part of this group because that's one of the requirements for entry to the group. And then start posting your questions, sharing information that you might find out. All right, now to the regularly scheduled presentation. How much will it cost? A lot of this has been covered, so I'm going to go over it rather quickly. But my business partner is an accountant by profession, so he crunches numbers. And I will tell you this, if you are thinking about growing hops commercially, you need to approach it as you would any other business. If you invest in any other business, you're going to put a lot of money out up front, and you're not actually going to make money for 3 years. So expect a 3-year return on investment. So it depends on who you talk to, what your goals are, what you already own, who you're asking. So why are all those important? If I'm looking to just grow enough to sell to my one local brewer, I'm not going to have as much infrastructure needs. If I have a forest behind me that I own as part of my hop yard, I can go out and harvest my own poles. If I'm, on the other hand, looking to grow 2 to 3 acres of hops, and I want to be able to continue to expand after that, your infrastructure costs are going to be a lot more. You're not going to be able to harvest poles off your own property and do it for free. You're going to be buying them commercially. You may be, depending on the size of the poles that you want, you may be spending up to $100 per pole. At Huguenot Hops, we're using a 25-foot poles, so our trellis system is 21 foot tall, and with that comes a lot of complexity and a lot more cost. So we'll talk about the specific costs. Your trellis systems, your irrigation, if you buy plants or rhizomes, and those are 2 options, and we'll talk a little bit about the benefits. Fertilizer, fungicides, pesticides, herbicides, special equipment, hops and soil testing. Stan's already talked about it, Steve's already talked about it. Getting the soil tested, it's not expensive. In fact, our extension agency will do it for free. They'll even come out and take the soil samples for you from various points of your yard, but still very important to get that done. Labor or food and beer. So we had our harvest festival last year. We had a little over 100 people come out, and we harvested close to 200 pounds. We fed them barbecue, we fed them hot dogs, and they killed 20 gallons of beer. So it was something that was fun and enjoyable, but not something that we can sustain for a 2 or 2.5 acre farm. We also leverage the people who are interested in growing hops as free labor. So we have people call us probably every other week wanting to come out and look at our hop yard. And we say, we would love to have you come out for a tour of our hop yard, but wait until we ... fill in the blank. Are putting plants in the ground, are stringing up hops, are harvesting. So what we do is we leverage the people who are interested in hops, and we post the information on our Facebook page. We allow them to come out. In fact, this picture on the top, we were planting, we had 700 new plants we put in last fall. We do both a spring planting and a fall planting to expand our yard. And we had 3 or 4 people come out to help us. We completed the task, we showed them the rest of the yard, answered their questions, and it was valuable for them and us. Processing services. So you can work with there are other entities that will do hops processing for you, so you need to figure that into the cost of what your business plan is going to be, and please develop a business plan. Don't just throw hops in the ground and say, I'm going to grow them and sell them to a brewery. If you don't have a plan, you're not going to succeed. If you want to invest in processing equipment, there are alternatives. Stan mentioned small-scale harvesters, the Buying 3060, which can run $15,000. You can also get those for free. Not free, I'm sorry. It would be nice to get them for free, wouldn't it? But you can buy them used if you search the internet and spend some time looking at it. The reason you can buy them used is people will buy them. It helps them develop their hop yard to the point they get 2 or 3 acres. And after those plants become mature, that Vine 3060 isn't large enough for them. So they will sell it, use that money, and buy a wolf or something comparable. You also need to consider pelletizing, hammer mill, packaging equipment. You can get a very small scale hammer mill and pelletizer for about $3,500, assuming you have the power that's needed to run it, a 3-phase or a single phase. And you have to be able to keep the temperatures low enough so that it doesn't deteriorate those essential oils in the hops. So those are some of the considerations, but there's a lot that goes into just developing your basic components. So the ballpark range is $8,000 to $20,000 per acre. You've seen between 8 and 12. So why do I go up so high? Well, it depends on, again, what your goal is. At Huguenot Hops, we're doing a very tall trellis system comparable to what they do out in the Pacific Northwest. So our eventual goal is once these plants become mature that we will be able to harvest 3 pounds wet per plant. Most of the folks in our region are looking at 2 pounds wet per plant. And that's built on a little shorter trellis system that's a little easier to harvest, also easier to install and maintain. Does not include a sexy tractor or farming attachments. A land lease, we've talked with several people who said, I'm going to lease some land and grow hops on it, and we tell them don't do it. You're not going to make money in 3 years and you're just going to be spending money. Source of water, unless you have some sort of a natural lake or a stream or a secondary well on your property, try to determine where you're going to get that water from. It's not going to be free. You're going to have to power some sort of equipment to get that, and you're not going to take it off of a public water source, right? Because of chemicals that are in that. Marketing and publicity, and lots of checks. So the later part of my presentation is talking about marketing and publicity. By the way, I see several people taking pictures. If you want this presentation, please just email me. I will be glad to send it to you. There's nothing proprietary up here that I wouldn't share with folks. With marketing and publicity, you have to have business cards. You need to develop some sort of brochure that you can hand out to people. You need to set up a website. So there are financial costs involved with your marketing and publicity campaign. Building the trellis, here are some of the considerations. If you want to build a shorter trellis system, you can use 16-foot 6x6 poles. And those of you who were in the session yesterday for new growers, you probably covered a lot of this, which is why I'm going over it quickly. Or you can do tall poles up to 25 feet with an 8-inch butt on them. You can get them free, either cedar or black locust. We've had several people say, hey, I've got a lot of pine trees out in my back. Can I use those? No. When you build a trellis system, you want to build it, and it should last 20 years. You're not going to be rebuilding it every 5 or 6 years. It is a very labor-intensive and costly process. And this comment that Stan made earlier about starting small with 1/3 of an acre is essentially important because invariably there's going to be one part of that hop yard, at least one part, that during your first year you're going to realize it's completely wrong. And you're going to tear it down and you're going to start again, whether it was your irrigation system, the spacing on the plants, or the type of trellis. So starting small is important because it allows you to make some mistakes on a small scale. If you end up buying commercial poles that are treated for use in agriculture industry, and if you're only buying 50 for an acre, you'll be spending up to $120 per pole. You need equipment to lift the poles up and to drill holes, unless you have a lot of really good brawny friends who love working post-hole diggers and showing how strong they are by lifting up a 100-pound or 150-pound pole. You'll need to rent equipment. We had a crane come out one day, and the thing is, even though you might spend $600 or $800 to rent a crane for a day, you can get a lot of poles in the ground fairly quickly. Are you putting your poles on every row, or are you spanning multiple rows? Are they spaced 35 feet apart or 50 apart? It depends again on how close your plants are and how much weight you expect those poles to support. The cables, clamps, and thimbles, again, it goes from, if you're having shorter runs with a lot of space between your plants, you could use 8-inch galvanized cable. If you're going long distances, you might need to use 5/16-inch cable. Different types of runs, 1,000-foot roll, anywhere from $85 up to $265. If you have larger equipment, you can buy a 5,000-foot roll, but you need to make sure you have a way that you can get that out into the field and roll it off of the roll because you're not going to pick that one up by hand. You also need to consider ground anchors and turnbuckles, both size and cost. Depends on your type of support system. A lift or a ladder, either a rental or a purchase or build it. At Huguenot Hops, we found a scrap dealer who had a large platform ladder like you would see at Home Depot or Lowe's. It was 14 foot. So we bought that for $125, put it on a trailer that could go through the farm, and now we have a platform that is 18 foot tall. I love it up there, my partner not so much. And when we have people come out to visit the farm, we ask them to go up there so they can get a better feel of and look and experience, and I would say only 1 out of 10 people wants to climb up on the top of that platform. It's not OSHA approved. So these two pictures show you the two different types of trellis systems. The one on the right is very much like what you would see where they have a single pole down each row, and it's probably a 16-foot pole, 3 to 4 foot in the ground. And the one on the left there, they have 3 rows in between their pole system, and they are using guide wires to support their long runs. There's a lot of math involved, weight considerations, and support. So if you're going to go that direction, make sure you have somebody work with you on the design. Plants, rhizomes, or clippings, so there's 3 ways that you can put hops in the ground. Plants from a commercial grower, $3 to $11, and you can determine whether you want to do hop starts, field grades, or crowns. The more you buy, the better your discount. You can also negotiate shipping with it. If you're willing to take a weekend trip, drive up. If you want to go to Great Lakes Hops, drive up there and pick them up, then you're going to save that. Rhizomes are going to be anywhere from $1.25 to $6, and again, it depends. Certified clean or organic, and remember also that you do have a high failure rate for rhizomes, and I've heard growers saying up to a 50% failure rate. So most growers put 2 or 3 rhizomes per hill. Again, depends on your perspective. Are you doing this commercially and you want to have a good yield your first year? You might be putting 3 rhizomes per hill, and at that point, it's just as cost effective to buy plants that are ready to go. Clippings are free, assuming that you've got a friend who's growing hops and he's willing to go out with you in the morning and do some clippings, and that you've got the expertise to grow them. So this is just a visual of what a hop start looks like. A field grade plant or a crown. We buy field grade plants from Great Lakes Hops, so we know they're clean. We know that we're going to get a yield the first year. And out of 500 plants that we put in the ground in the fall of last year, we only had 4 or 5 that didn't come up in the spring. So really successful. Your irrigation systems determine. Look at your water source. 3 gallons per plant 2 or 3 times a week. Depends on the temperature. Depends on your soil. You have a pond, lake, river, well, and you need a filtration system. If you're going to use a sand filtration, you're pulling water out of a pond that's somewhat stagnant. You're not going to want to just put everything in there. What are you going to use for a pump, gas or electric, and how many gallons per minute will that pump provide to your irrigation system? You need to have a control system. So how many plants can you water per zone on your irrigation system? How many zones are you going to have? How long is it going to take you to water that entire field? So there's a lot of considerations. And again, look at the long term. What is your goal? Is this to be able to have a 5-acre or a 10-acre hop yard? Some of these considerations are going to cost you a lot of money if you're really building for the long run. You could also put in a drip tape versus pipe. We use irrigation pipe. We put 2 emitters per plant. Why 2 emitters per plant? It costs us twice as much. But what if one of those emitters gets clogged or fails during the growing season? Then you've got a plant that is not going to get the appropriate water. And at 2.5 acres, you're not going to be able to walk through the field every time you're doing watering between 4 a.m. and 9 a.m. in the morning. So a little bit of redundancy is good. It costs more, but it helps achieve the goal. All the other stuff that you're going to need: mulch or weed barrier, equipment rental, soil and hop analysis testing, fertilizer, lots and lots of nitrogen. Twine or core, specialty tools, and Steve had a picture of the W-clips. Fuel and equipment repair. Don't forget that. Even if you have a tractor or an RTV that you're going to be using, it's going to break. You're going to run over something in the field and you're going to pop a tire, so you're going to have to replace it, repair it. You're going to need to buy diesel. And if you want to do your own processing, it is possible to do your own processing. You need to learn a lot about how that process works, and you need to do a lot of research on where you're going to get the equipment to do it, and you need to have a facility or a place where you can put the equipment to do it properly. Business cards, insurances, and tax. So what does it all cost? You want to see some numbers. So you saw some of these earlier from Steve's presentation. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, but those are that's the basics. I will tell you at Huguenot Hops, when we did our business plan, we based our cost per acre on this, but because of our end objectives, we built it a little bit more robust than others might. We were at $18,000 an acre, which is why we did a Kickstarter. Some other references for cost calculations: North Carolina State has a budget planner, Michigan State has a budget planner, UVM has a budget planner, and the Virginia Extension Service has a worksheet. The thing I like about this worksheet is it doesn't cover just what it's going to cost you to build your hops infrastructure, but it also shows how much you could potentially yield your first year, your second year, your third year, so you get a full ROI on your investment. And everybody knows that you're not going to get a great yield your first year or your second year, but that third year is really what you're aiming for. So use some of these resources. Our members map, we already talked about that. I know I'm talking fast, but I'm standing between you and lunch, and I don't want to do that. 10 things you need to do to sell hops to a brewery. Have a business card with your name, the name of your hop yard, your phone number, your email address, and maybe a hop on there. Why do you need a card? Because as Stan said earlier and Steve said earlier, the brewers are busy. They're not going to be standing out at the front counter waiting for you. The other thing I will say, always carry them with you. You should always have a business card in your pocket, because you never know when you're going to be at a conference, at a brew store, a pub, and have an opportunity to meet somebody. So make sure you have those. They don't have to be real complex. You can buy them from Vistaprint for like $10 for 250 cards. Just get something out there. Nice to have a logo. It can be simple or it can be complex. Create a short sales brochure, 2 pages, no more than 4. Includes a picture of your hop yards. Talk about why you're growing hops. Talk about the varieties you grow. Discuss your goals for the upcoming season. Your price. A lot of people don't like to talk about price until they get in front of the brewer. I don't know why. Do you think you have some special leverage if there aren't other growers out there? Here's my caveat. So there are about 100 breweries. There's 101 right now in Virginia, and somewhere around 100 in North Carolina. There are 200 people attending this conference. We have over 100 members on the Old Dominion Hops membership list. A brewery is probably going to make 1 harvest ale a year with wet hops. A 15-barrel system, they'll use somewhere between 50 pounds and 100 pounds of wet hops. So if we have 200 people in the state growing hops, and we have 200 breweries, and each of them, and realize they're not going to, each of them made 1 harvest festival, that means each of you has 1 opportunity to sell between 50 and 100 pounds of wet hops. The rest of them you're going to have to dry and process. That's just the reality. Selling wet hops is a stepping stone for us as growers to start maturing and understanding how this industry works. It's not the eventual goal. Once we get to 3 acres of hops, if we get 3 pounds per plant, we have 9,000 pounds of wet hops. We're not going to sell 9,000 pounds of wet hops to the breweries in Virginia. That's just the reality. If you can't get a meeting with the brewer after several attempts, leave the brochure with the server along with your business card. I've done this at breweries, and I actually had one brewer that contacted me back, and we ended up getting a sale from them because they were able to look at the brochure and they knew what they were going to get. Establish a presence on social media. If you're a business, consider Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Use these business accounts to like the breweries where you want to sell your hops. Respond to their posts, reshare their posts, make comments on their tweets. Sometimes the brewers are small enough that they are doing their own social media. Sometimes they hire someone else to do that for them that's within the brewery. Eventually that person, if they have a marketing person, will recognize you and say, hey, Mr. Brewer, have you seen this stuff from Huguenot Hops? Go look at their website. They're doing great. Go to the breweries. drink their beer. Yeah, not only we don't get into growing hops because we're going to get rich. It's farming. If you know any rich farmers, please tell me. A lot of the brewers who get into the industry do it because they're passionate about beer. They're not doing it to get rich. I know a couple brewers over the past 2 years who have made a good bit of money, but the majority of them are earning a reasonable income. So with farming hops, you should look to do it to make a reasonable income, not get rich. Maybe it's ancillary income. If you're doing less than 3 acres of hops, it's ancillary income. If you want to do it and you want it to be your primary business and it's the only thing you're doing, you're going to have at least 5 acres of hops. If you look at a business plan and you march out all the numbers, you're going to realize very quickly that it's not, as everybody says, a cash crop. It's not a cash crop. If you love craft beers, grow hops, get involved, and then go drink beers. You often get free beers at the breweries. Leave your card, ask to meet the brewer. If he or she's not available, get a phone number. The guys behind the counter normally have their email address of the brewers, and they'll give it to you if you're nice to them and leave them a big tip, okay? And then follow up through an email or a phone call. Once the brewer has your information and has seen your brochure, don't just cold call them through an email and say, I've got hops I want to sell. You need to present it professionally. Make it a business proposal to them, not just a, hey, I'm a farmer and I'm in your area, all right? Ask for a tour of the brewery if it's not publicly offered. Most breweries do have tours on the weekend or once a week. Check their schedule, see if it is. If it's not, brewers love to show you all the equipment they have, how it all operates. They're excited about it. And if you show as much enthusiasm about their brewing as you have for your hops, you'll definitely want to do this. Find out if they have a hop back or if they've ever brewed with wet hops. Discover if they use any of your hops, the varieties in their beers. That's important because you want to try to match that together. There's a lot of obstacles with brewers using wet hops. I think I'll talk about that later in the presentation, and I have 10 more minutes and 20 more slides. Invite brewers or brewery owners or brewery staff out to your farm and make it an event by offering lunch and beer. Last year, we probably had 7 different brewers come out to our hop yard. We had one day that was a full day event. A lot of positive feedback. The other part is that they get integrated into what you're doing and they want you to succeed. I haven't started doing our 2015 sales yet. I've already had 2 brewers contact me from last year, said, when are you guys going to start giving us your information because we want to use your hops? You've got to build a relationship with them. Realize that you're never going to be able to sell if you're growing commercially, and even if you're doing a half an acre, you're never going to be able to sell all your hops to a single brewery unless you're already planning to pelletize and package. So develop relationships with multiple breweries. The other advantage is you get to drink lots of different styles of beer. Develop a sales contract. Remember, this is a business, and have it ready when you talk to your brewers. After a meeting or a hop yard tour, ask them to buy your hops. You're not going to get a sale if you don't ask for it. Huguenot Hops developed a sales contract. It's fairly generic, and it's designed for agriculture products. They can commit to a 1-year, a 2-year, a 3-year term. They can commit to wet, dried, pelletized. Give them that opportunity. If you all want a copy of this and you want to conform it to your own business case, again, join the Old Dominion Hop Co-op. Get on that private Facebook group and you'll find this document out there. Understand that breweries have brewing schedules. Smaller breweries may only look 3 months in advance. Some of the larger breweries are looking 6 months in advance. So if you wait until your hops are at the top of the trellis system to get a brewer out to come look at what you're growing, and you haven't already approached them about their potential interest in your hops, it's going to be more difficult because they've got to use their equipment and they've got to plan how they're going to provide for their consumers on an ongoing basis the styles and the varieties that they need. Do not show up at the brewery on the day of your harvest. Expect to sell in and out. I ran into this. One of the brewers that we sold to last year, one of our larger customers, they were doing a wet harvest ale. We took in about 200 pounds of wet hops, and they said a guy showed up the day before with 40 pounds of hops, and they were poor quality, and I was asked to take them, look through them, filter them out, and dry them so they could maybe use them later. And it left a bad taste in the brewer's mouth. So I want to encourage us as a growers industry to avoid that. Build relationships with multiple breweries, unlike the name about all your hops. Remember that the hops you're always going to have more to sell next year. So deliver the best crop that you can grow. Long-term success is built on repeat business. I see Justin shaking his head. Have your hops tested. Since our first year, we've sent our hops out to multiple labs in order to get results because they differ slightly. We sent them to Virginia Tech so that they can start building their database. You also want to do your testing before you're going to deliver the hops to the brewery, because if they are going to do any type of calculation, then they need that information in advance. This is going to be especially true if you're working more on a longer-term basis with dried hops or pelletized hops. So now, answering objections. Does that look like a happy farmer? They're too expensive. I can't buy them. I can buy them for half the price. And guess what? That's absolutely true. I don't use whole hops at my brewery because they clog my equipment. Guess what? That is true also. I can't be sure of the quality you provide. That is absolutely true, especially if you're a first-year grower. I want a product that I can use all year long. There are breweries that we've talked to in the Richmond area and Virginia Beach area who would love to use Virginia hops in a flagship beer. We were at a meeting in Loudoun County last year, and the reality is that if all of the hop growers at that time dried their hops and pelletized them and provided them to this one brewery, they could brew for about 3 months. So we just don't have the volume yet. So they're too expensive. Why? Why does this 10-ounce serving of craft beer cost about the same as a 6-pack of Miller, Bud, or Coors? It's true. In fact, I was out 2 nights ago and I spent $8 on a small 10-ounce glass. It was awesome. We face similar challenges. Large-scale production allows economies of scale. Brewing on a 200-barrel system versus a 10-barrel system is very much compared to growing on a 450-acre farm versus a 2-acre farm. Why did I use 440 acres? That's the average size of a hop yard out in the Pacific Northwest. Mechanization versus manual labor, automated brewing process versus doing it the hard way. Do you guys remember that commercial, Super Bowl? Yeah, they said they were doing it the hard way. We know that they were just pushing buttons. A large-scale harvester, oats and pelletizers that process several tons of hops each day versus manual labor process. So investing in a used Wolf harvester, $140,000, $36,000, includes delivery, setup, and getting it dialed in for the first run. That's a pretty big investment. But it's nothing compared to some of the large ones that they're using out in the Pacific Northwest. Large consumer base. Macro breweries have over 90% of the market share. Pacific Northwest farms, hop farms, account for 98% of all U.S. production. So we're competing on the scale that's terrible. Location. Washington State produces 79% of the hops in the U.S. because it's a favorable climate. And Stan talked about this earlier, the challenges we have with disease. By the way, you should ask Stan about his experiment with Centennial hops, and you will quickly learn why he is a proponent of ensuring that the varieties we plant here are not susceptible to downy mildew. It's a sad story, but true. In 2014, average yield was 1,936 pounds per acre. That's dried. North Carolina and Virginia is closer to 500 pounds dried. So for the same ground, for the same amount of labor, for what I consider higher cost to establish, we're having a yield that's 25% what the growers in the Pacific Northwest. We're not going to be able to charge 4 times as much for our hops. That would run most brewers out of the market. So we have to find a happy medium somewhere in the middle. I know a lot of wet hops right now are sold $15 or $17 a pound wet. You can't dry your hops and expect to sell them at $60 a pound. Is $30 a pound reasonable? Maybe on a small scale for a brewer who's going to buy 100 pounds. Is 20 reasonable? I don't know. We're still trying to figure that out, but it's going to be somewhere between that. to make it reasonable for us all to grow on the scale we can grow on with the challenges we have. Breweries say that they don't use whole cone hops. That's true, because it clogs up their plate chillers. It clogs up some of their other piping that they have. So a hop bag eliminates that. You can also talk to them about using a cloth bag, either during their boil process or during the fermentation. We have a brewery in Williamsburg that uses wet hops, 50-pound, and they have about 14 pillowcase size bags of cloth material. They put our hops in, they just let them sit in there and soak for a week. So there's different ways to get around that. If you want to sell on a smaller scale, see if they would be willing to use some of your dried hops, or even wet hops, in a pen, a randle, or a cask. So there's other options there. Quality. This is part of building the relationship, telling the story. Ask the brewers out to your hop yard. Let them walk through at different points of the season so they can see what challenges you face. Have your hops tested. And if you're going to process them, have them tested wet, and then have them tested once they're processed, because you're gonna realize that there is a degradation, and you want to know what that is. Storage index I put up there, I wanted to mention. When brewers are buying hops from Hop Union or one of the large commercial providers, those hops are from last season. Maybe they've been in storage for 6 months. Maybe they've been kept at the proper temperature, maybe they have not. But hops have what we call a hop storage index. Different varieties degrade at different rates, even if they're stored properly. So what was a 9% alpha at harvest, if it's been in a cooler for 9 months and they're just getting ready to put it in their beer, it may be at 8 or 7.5% alpha. The quality of the aroma that it was when it was first harvested and tested is not going to be the same as it is 6 to 8 months later when it's put in a brew kettle. So that's another selling advantage you have, is because it's fresh, it's going to be local, but it has to be very high quality. Otherwise, you're not going to make a sale, and you're not going to get repeat business. Explain that you're aware of harvest moisture content, drying moisture content, processing, and storage techniques. I hope somebody later in this presentation will talk about processing. I learned a lot last year about what it takes to actually properly process hops, and it's not an easy thing to go through. Brewers might say, I want a hop that I can use all year long. We just don't have enough between North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland to provide for a year-long beer for a brewery yet. But we're working towards that goal, and I believe it's achievable probably within the next 3 years. This little guy here, we call him Thor. He costs $1,500. We can process approximately 50 pounds an hour. We're going to keep it in a room at 50 degrees while we're processing, because we don't want the output temperature of those hops to be over 100 degrees. If you get over 100 degrees, it starts degrading. So it's not as efficient as a large-scale hops processing facility would be, but you can do it. And at the end, you get to go drink 3 beers with the brewer. So that's it. And we're on schedule.
Thank you very much. And yes, we are going to have someone handling processing after lunch. But before lunch, we want to take time to recognize our sponsors. So I hope a few of them are in the room so we can start off right away. Who do we have first? Okay. So first we've got John Bryce with Lupulin Exchange. And they're just all going to take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about their companies, and some of them have some services and products that you probably want to know about.
I'm going to show a few slides, if you wouldn't mind hitting the lights one more time. Thank you. I apologize for not bringing my hop costume. I left it at home. Anyway, my name is John Bryce. I've been in the commercial brewing industry, working in breweries for about 14 years. And I've run brewery operations at some of the largest and smallest breweries in Virginia. As part of my duties running breweries, I've had to spend a lot of time adjusting hop contracts. At times that meant selling off tens of thousands of pounds of over-contracted hops. That process is very complicated and very time-consuming, and I did not enjoy it. Last year I had an idea for a website to make this process easier for brewers while adding fairness and transparency to the hop industry. In September, I launched the Huguenot Exchange with the help of some good friends. All 4 of us have day jobs, but the Huguenot Exchange is a fun side project. Since launch less than 6 months ago, hundreds of commercial brewers have sold nearly $450,000 worth of hops on the Huguenot Exchange. We quickly realized that some of the back-end services we built for the large hop brokers would also be very useful to growers. We're currently in the process of making these services available to growers in a free package, which we're calling Trellis. I'd like to give you a 30-second preview of that service right now. Trellis allows growers to embed a web store on their own website in minutes. Trellis gives growers the same order fulfillment system that has been battle tested by the very large hop brokers such as BSG. With Trellis, you'll never have to worry about payment processing, invoicing, or chasing down your money. We're currently giving away Trellis on a first-come, first-served basis. You can sign up now at blog.huguenotexchange.com. Feel free to grab me if you have questions, want to see a demo, or want to tell me about features you'd like to see in future upgrades. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.
So our next sponsor who's going to present is Lee Galligan with Hops. Okay.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lee Galligan with Hops. And thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm one of. I'm sorry. Hi, I'm Lee Galligan with John Hops. And thanks for allowing me to be here. I wanted to give you a bit of an overview of what goes on in the larger hop industry. We're one of the folks that's out in Yakima. We're about 100 years old in the States this year. Our German sister company is about in the 240s years old these days. So we are part of the Barthas group. We're in Yakima. We're hop growers. We're hop breeders. We process a lot of pellets. We process extracts, isomerized extracts. And we also have our own brewery out in Yakima where we actually brew from new varieties that we're developing so we can make sure that we get the flavor transfer from the new varieties. We have facilities in Germany, I mentioned, the UK, China, primarily sales office, and Australia, where we have 2 farms and a breeding operation. Now, I may walk around on this one and speak more loudly. So this is the history of hop acreage for the past 100 years. If you, look all the way over here, 1915. You might notice there's a big gap in acreage right here. That's prohibition. But you might also notice the hops didn't stop getting made here in the United States. Gosh, I wonder where they're being used. So certainly there was a lot of beer being made at that time. Second thing I want to point out to you is, if you look, there's a huge amount of variation from year to year in acreage, which simply makes the point that this is a market that responds to supply and demand. If there's a lot of supply, pricing will come down, and the farmers will respond by pulling hops acreage came out of the ground, or hops came out of that acreage. So this is a market that responds to that very much so, and you need to be aware of that. Now, Devon, I believe, or maybe it was, who was it, earlier today mentioned that there's been a big change in the U.S. varieties grown. On this graph, you see the green bars are alpha, or what we would call bittering hops. These are your standard traditional hops, Columbus, Tomahawk, Zeus type hops. They're used primarily for bittering, not necessarily for aroma or flavor. The yellow bar on top there is aroma hops. So back in 2008 or so, I believe it's about 60%, 70% of the hops that were grown in the U.S. were high alpha hops, bittering hops, and the balance of 30% or so being aroma. Today, out in the U.S., about 60% of all hops that are grown are aroma hops. This is a direct response to what's happening with the craft guys. The craft brewers are very much looking for flavorful hops, and they're looking for new things, and they're very much artists in that direction. The increase in acreage I mentioned is about 30% increase in acreage in the past couple years, so it's really been significant. This is a graph that shows the acreage per variety in the U.S. And this is the first year that Cascade, maybe hard to read, became the largest hop grown out there by acreage. And it exceeded CTZ, which stands for Columbus, Tomahawk, Zeus, traditional bittering hops. So now an aroma hop is the largest hop grown in the U.S. by acreage. The second thing I want to point out with this graph is the orange slices of that pie refer to proprietary or semi-proprietary varieties. And so that's the sort of Simcoe, Summit, Citra, Simcoe, Amarillo, etc. Apollo. These are proprietary varieties that are really growing in popularity, and they currently represent about 30% of all the acreage that hops are on right now. This is a pictorial that you have seen earlier today, perhaps. The upper left there is the Pacific Northwest. Now, out there, about 38,000 acres are grown, or hops are grown on about 38,000 acres. And between Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, there are about 71 growers. And as I believe Devon mentioned, the average grower is 450 to 500 acres. So they're large commercial operations. Most of the growers have picking and drying and sometimes pelletizing capacity, large investments of money. Now the rest of the country, the non-Pacific Northwest, comprises, we estimate, about 1,200 acres. And the average grower, as everyone's mentioned, is a smaller grower, typically of about 1 acre or less. Primarily, as was mentioned, because it's difficult to process a lot of hops by hand if you're not really a commercial operation yet. So this we see so we grow about 10% of what we sell. We have 1,600 acres in Yakima. But 90% of what we sell, we're purchasing from growers that we have contracts with, and we rely on the contracts for the growers to put the acreage in. So we think it's a great thing that there's growth on the East Coast and the Midwest for hops. Now, I don't want to be irresponsible here, but since Devon was already irresponsible, I'll be slightly irresponsible. Now, the craft brewers make about 8% of the market today. Craft beer is somewhere around 8%. The Brewers Association estimated that, here's a really cool factoid. 2014, last year, the craft guys, the 8% used more hops than everybody else in the whole beer business. The macro brewers used less than the craft guys. That's significant, really significant. And if those craft brewers grow to about 20% of the market by 2020, big things happen in the market. For instance, to supply that amount, as Devon mentioned, approximately 25 million pounds would be required. And the estimated cost of that is about $500 million. I would not want anyone to run out and get into the hop business as a result of what I'm saying to you. But I do want to tell you that this is where the market is now, and this is what's happening. So it's not easy to grow hops. It is a cool, sexy crop, I think, and beer is wonderful, and we want more of it. But just be aware of what's going on in the market. And thanks for growing hops, and have a great day. Thank you.
That was wonderful. More facts and figures for us. So our next sponsor that'll be speaking is Matthew Cheek with Cumberland Sales. Matthew? Okay. Could we have the lights on, please? Mary Jack, thanks.
How you guys doing? Good. Where's the beer? Yeah. So I'm with Cumberland Sales Company. We're a wire rope and rigging company, and we've been getting into the hops industry, and I'm really green and kind of learning as you guys are learning, and there's definitely a multitude of different ways that folks are putting up their trellis systems. But if you guys, it seems like for most of these, the 3/16 galvanized cable and the 1/4-inch cable seems to be a good way to go. But at the end of the day, just grab one of our catalogs, sit down with the list of items you want, email me a list, and I'll send you back kind of a package price on everything. By all means, shop around. There's a few of us here that are selling this stuff, and there's the prices in this industry do fluctuate, so definitely do the shopping around. And we're going to get into potentially designing a few different ways of doing these trellis systems, so be in touch with me, and hopefully in the future, maybe at the beginning of next year, we'll have some things together, and we're going to be working with some other growers and see how they do things, and see if there's a system we can create that might work well for different things. But here to help, and feel free to talk to me anytime. Thanks, guys.
And you're going to need some fertilizer for those plants. So our next sponsor is representing Fertrell, and that's Monica Pate.
Okay, I'm the shortest vendor in the building, probably. But no, my name is Monica Pape. I'm with the Fertrell Company. We're one of the oldest all-natural and organic fertilizer companies in the country. We're based out of Bainbridge. We work with backyard gardeners to, 1,000-acre farms. So you guys kind of fit right in with our clientele. And what we do in our office is we take a look at your soil reports and customize or tailor fertility programs based on those soil reports and based on what you're growing. So we're able to accommodate any needs that you have, and we have a full line of products that we, standard stock items that we, go with. But like I said, we're more than able to tailor programs to your growing needs, and take a look at your soil test reports. So if you have any questions, I'm here. I can look at your test results. Amy was interested to find out, what we could do to help her and how we could accommodate some of her needs. So that's what we do. We have dealers all over the country. If you go to our website, we have a dealer locator. Click on that, and the map will show you where a dealer is in your area, or you can go pick up one of our catalogs, and all our dealers are listed in the back of that as well. And they're more than happy to accommodate you and help you and guide you to whoever in the office you would need more information from. So I think that's about it. Thank you for having me, and if you have any questions,
Put my mic back. Do we have anyone from Sierra Nevada? I didn't think so. The new tap room is open, so if you want a really wonderful experience with some, at least I've seen some amazing food on Facebook, come on up to the new brewery. Heidi, you had me drooling all day. So talk to Heidi, she got to sample early. So Sierra Nevada was also a sponsor, and also Blue Mountain Brewery was a sponsor, and Stan is wearing the hat. You can chat with him later because we want to keep on time, because I told you we don't want an unhappy caterer. For gluten-free options, those of you that need gluten-free, please talk to the caterer. She's held some food, she's got food aside for you. Mary Jack, we need instructions for how we're serving this crowd, and we have an eating area for us.
Okay, thank you, Denise. So, what we're gonna do is you're gonna enter the
Presentation again is Steve Miller, and he's going to be talking to us about the harvest and post-harvest end, and this is going to produce the quality. This is where I, as the specialist, see a lot of us falling down on the job. We grow beautiful hops, but we don't really know when to harvest them, so we often harvest them too young, and then we destroy the quality while we're processing. So they were good on the vine, but when we deliver them to the brewer, they're not what they want. So hopefully Steve's going to tell us how to do it right. This one goes to 145. That's wrong. I wasn't going to tell the speakers that the clock that they look at is 5 minutes fast. It's been working up till now. He just figured it out.
Okay. All right, don't turn too many lights off. We don't want anybody going to sleep at this point. We all just ate. So some of what I'm going to mention has been talked about a little bit by some other speakers, both yesterday and today. Oh, is that better? But I'm hopefully going to get into a little more detail about equipment and things like airflow when you're drying and all that. But we're going to talk about harvesting and drying, pelleting, packaging, storage, and all the things that you need to do, or someone needs to do, before the brewer's going to want those hops. And even for wet hops, which I know a lot of people are selling fresh hops, there's some things you need to know about that too. So let's get started. What determines quality in the field? So these are all factors in the production end of it, before you harvest, the things you need to consider. And that's obviously the variety that you're selecting. Someone mentioned terroir before, virus-free rootstock, disease-tolerant varieties. That's all been mentioned so far. Latitude, that is a big factor here, and that does affect the amount of the yield that you'll be getting. But that doesn't mean you can't grow hops. Frost-free days, you need 120. Well, we certainly have more than that in Virginia and North Carolina. The issue is actually the other way around. If you don't have enough chilling, they need at least 8 weeks of chilling steady through the winter time in order to really get the plant to start growing properly. So that's a consideration. Training. Everybody thinks, I shouldn't say everybody, but all of us novices think that every variety is treated the same way. So you go out there May 1st, you're going to string them up. Well, that might work for Willamette, but maybe Nugget should be done 2 weeks before that, or Cascade should be done a week after that. So the point is that every variety is not treated the same. And out west, the families that are growing hops have 100 years of experience, and they've got that little notebook, and they know when they're supposed to train their Willamette. And it's based also on not just previous experience, but what the climate's like that spring, that the weather is like that spring. Is it early? Is it late? Training and stringing, it's very important, not only in the amount of yield that you're going to get, but also the pungency of the hops themselves. Because remember, we're doing this based on a very short growing season. These plants grow very quickly in the spring, they've got to get up to a certain height, and then they're being affected by the day length. That affects the flowering and the development of the chemistry in those hops. So training is very important. Constant monitoring for disease and insects. Certainly having too many spider mites or having a lot of downy mildew, you're going to affect the quality of those plants. And then I did want to just remind everybody about taking out the male plants. That's really important. When you buy rhizomes, you're going to find that if you buy 1,000, you may get a couple in there that are male plants. They have male plants out west. When you dig them up and you're chopping up the rhizomes, you can't tell that was a male hop plant or a female. So you're going to get some, and then eventually what you'll see is the flowers are going to look like this rather than the cones that we look at for the female plants. The other thing you might see, and everybody will get very concerned about this, oh, I've got male plants out there, and it turns out they're hermaphrodites, which means they've got male flowers and female flowers in the same plant. When that happens, luckily, those are sterile. The male flowers are sterile, 9 times out of 10. And it happens a lot with Cascade, and everybody plants Cascade, so I can guarantee that somewhere down the road you're going to say, oh, my Cascades are males now. What happened? They're hermaphrodites, so that doesn't mean you need to rip them all out. It's not going to produce seed. But seed production is something we don't want. When to harvest, so you need to plan ahead. The oil content for aroma varieties tends to develop later, at much later harvest time than the development of both beta and alpha chemicals in the hops. So first you get the beta developing, and then the alpha, and then the oils developing. And so what we want to do with our mostly aroma varieties is to leave them on a little bit longer. You'll think, well, they must be ready. They look good, they smell good, they must be ready. But if we're really after the most amount of oil content in that hop that we can get, you want to leave them probably another week past what you think that they were supposed to be. Now, we also have to be considered about those hops degrading, so leaving them too long, they're going to start to dry and fall apart, and they're going to be a problem during the harvest, the actual physical harvest. Looking at dry matter. Most of the growers that have been growing them for a long time, they can go out and they'll pick a willamette, and they can smell it, and they can feel it, and they know whether that's ready. But one of the tools that we have is looking at dry matter content, and as the dry matter increases in the hop, and we're just talking about the hops now, we're not measuring dryness of the leaves. As the dry matter increases in the hop, that means there's more density of plant material and less moisture. So as the dry matter increases from 20 to 22 to 24, depending on the variety, you might leave them on longer. So as I said earlier, for a Cascade, you might leave it to as long as 24% dry matter. And this isn't the same as taking a measurement of the moisture content. This is the oils and the things that do not have moisture in them are actually increasing in that flower. They're getting denser, they're getting heavier. So that's what we're looking for, is that development in the cone to go beyond at least 22 to 24%. For those of you who want to know how to do that, UVM has a calculator right on their website that you need a very good scale, and you can weigh the hops at different times. Go out and pick some today, and then go out and pick some next week, and see that dry matter content increase. And they have a thing on their website on how to calculate that. This last one is very important as an operational consideration. Planning which varieties are going to be harvested first if you've got a dryer and you've got a picker, you can't have 5 acres of all one variety. You can, but you won't get them all picked in a week. That's the problem. So you need to make sure that your hop harvest is going to be over 20 days or so if possible, so that you've got some varieties coming in early, some next week, some later than that, because otherwise you'll have to use all of your equipment at its maximum capacity in a 2 or 3 day period. So you need to, that way you can actually grow more, but use that same equipment over a longer period of time. Am I kind of making that clear? So a lot of people say, well, I'm just going to go out and plant 4 acres of Cascade. Well, that means you need a dryer that's that much bigger, because you're going to dry all 4 acres in 2 or 3 days rather than drying 4 acres of mixed varieties that will go over a longer period. What determines quality in the harvest operation? So cutting the bines at about 3 to 4, even as much as 5 feet off the ground. The reason we do that is because we want to maintain some live plant after we've cut them. Hops are perennial, so any of the nutrients that are in those stems and leaves, as they die back through the rest of the season, are going to go down into the roots and produce a stronger plant for next year. Those of you who are hand picking, and you're not, and when I say hand picking, I mean hand picking in the field. Sure, you could actually go out and pick right off the plant and leave those plants growing right until they die in the fall. But otherwise, for the most part, we're always cutting the plant before it's really ready to die back. So, and here I heard people saying that they've been cutting as early as mid-July harvesting. You've got 3 months more of growth that you can get out of that plant to help it strengthen itself for next year. Only pick what you can dry within a day. So most of the dryers that we use are going to take 8 to 10 hours, maybe 14 hours to dry the hops. Again, if you have, that's going to be your limiting factor. It's very easy to go out and pick 1,000 hop plants and bring them to the barn. Now, if you don't have the capacity to pick them, and you don't have the capacity to dry them and get them processed so that they can be put away before the next 1,000 plants has to be done, you're really going to ruin what you've picked. So just pick enough that you know that you can dry that next day, because those dryers have to be empty before you can put any more in there. The other thing is you want to make sure that you're not too far away from a picker. I'm going to use the term picker rather than harvester, because people interchange those terms, and it's, when you think of a harvester, most people think of a grain harvester or a combine that's going out in the field and it's cutting the corn, cutting the grain, and shelling it and getting it all into a bin at the same time. With hops, you're not doing that. You're cutting the plants separately, bringing them to a machine, and I guess I would call it more like a pea sheller. That is a stationary machine that is then going to take the hops off the plant. And I've got some pictures, and we'll look at those too. So you want to get those plants, after you've cut them, they need to be to a picker within a half an hour to 45 minutes. So that doesn't mean you drove a half an hour to get there, because now how many hours are they going to sit in the back of some trailer out in the sun? When the hops have all the leaves on those plants and they are in the sun, they not only heat up, which is going to destroy some of the oils, but they start to dry. And when they dry, the cones start to open up. When you put them through a hop picker, they're going to shatter and fall apart. And instead of having now cones that are usable, you're going to have all these feathers and flakes that are really of no value to anybody, because you won't be able to retrieve them. So you need to keep the cones intact. The other thing is, for a mechanical picker, they're all based on the hops having some weight so that they roll. And we'll see the pictures of those, why that's important. But if they start to dry, when the fingers go to pick the hops off the vine, they're gonna actually be harder to get off because the stems have started to dry. And when the hops do get picked off, they're not gonna roll down the picker in order to get to the bottom conveyor belt. They're gonna go out with the leaves and the trash. So that's a major concern. Let's see. I'm not gonna talk about those. This is just a quick chart, and doesn't have all the varieties, but you can see that you don't want varieties that are being ripe all at the same time. This is in Germany, so that the month is not going to really mean anything to you, August and September, because you're pretty much picking before that. But this is the kind of information you need to know when you're going to select varieties, and after you've got some, you need to know, well, is Willamette before Nugget? Is Chinook before Nugget? Is Cascade last? So that's something you need to keep in mind. So, out west and in areas where you have a larger acreage, you're cutting them with they have a picking arm that actually cuts the plant up at the base about this far off the ground, and the strings are tied to the top wire, and as it goes down the row, it actually pulls the strings right off the wire and flips them into these trailers. Some of the growers use an actual truck like this, and they convert them over into an open trailer to utilize them that way. But again, you don't want that sitting out in the sun for hours. Those hops are really going to be of no value to anybody. So quality is very important, and keeping them cool and out of the sun is the key right there. Mechanical picking. If you've got a hop plant that's nice and dense, you're not going to be able to hand pick that plant. It's going to take at least 45 minutes to an hour to pick all the hops. Now, the first couple of years when the plants are small, yes, you can get by with hand picking, and you're going to be able to do that. But anything more than about a half an acre, you're going to find that hand picking is really not something you're going to be able to do. So this is what a wolf harvester looks like. You're putting the whole string in at one end, and right up here there's a chain that goes around. It's got these little clamps and drags the plants right into the top, like that. While whatever harvester you're using, let's always remember that hops need to be up off the ground. They should not be laying in the dirt, and they should, what's wrong with this picture? You got a dryer right below that. These are, this is really important. Your hops, especially if you're selling whole leaf or if you're selling fresh hops to a brewer, when are they using them in the brewing process? Got brewers in the room, I know. When are they being used? At the end. The water is not boiling for the most part. If you're doing it in the boil, they're probably putting in pellets. But whole leaf, they're putting it in water that's relatively cold. And in some cases, if they're dry hopping, they may be in the fermentation tank. They might be really cold. In other words, it's not warm enough to kill any bacteria that are in there. So your product, you want to make sure it doesn't have yeast and bacteria and dirt on it. This is ultimately important. Somebody's going to make a batch of beer that's worth thousands of dollars, and they don't want anybody getting sick or that beer turning sour because your product was contaminated. So you wouldn't want to eat food that was placed out on a buffet right underneath those birds. I know I wouldn't. So you certainly wouldn't want beer made that way either. So that's really important to remember. this is the guts of what it looks like inside of a wolf picker, and pretty much all the other harvesters that are made out there use these fingers to knock the hops off. And you'd say, well, those wire fingers look like they're going to damage the hops, but actually they work really well. And again, the hops have to have enough moisture when they're fresh, so they've got a little bit of weight, and they knock right off the stems. And so you'll find that pretty much all these are made the same way, and you can buy replacement parts. Or if I was talking to somebody earlier that's making their own harvester, you can buy these and build your own harvester if you want. They fall off. The drums are up above where we're standing looking down, and then the hops fall down onto these what are called dribble belts, and the hops will roll down those because they're on an incline, and the leaves and the stems and the trash stay stuck on here. And so they'll go from this belt to this belt to this belt, and finally out the end with the trash. The leaves are kind of bristly and sticky, and they'll stay right on there. You'll also see that many of the harvesters will have fans that will blow air or suck a vacuum onto the belts, so that, it helps hold the leaves there as they're going through the whole process. And the hops end up down in the base. UVM designed and built a harvester based essentially on a wolf harvester, but smaller, that they can put on a trailer. They work really well. It's going to cost you probably $15,000 at least in materials to build one. They upgrade the plans every year, and you can go right on their website and get the plans. It's not going to cost you a thing to do that. At this point, that's pretty well proven technology, and the big advantage is that it's small enough to go on a trailer and be taken from farm to farm. Guy right near me built this guillotine kind of thing here. The hops hang vertically and go through it. Again, using all the same type of picking bars that are used in the industry. Works really well. The only problem is again, it's not mobile, and it's about 15 feet tall. This one was designed by a guy in Maryland, and I bought this from him last year, and we're having it beefed up and making it a little bit taller. What I like about it is we're using it for our research plots, because the plants get put on this little track. The machine is turned off. So if I want to put 2 or 3 plants of the same variety on there and pick them at the same time, I can do that. You pull them into the harvester here, and then there's the same kind of vertical picking arms in there that will knock all the hops off down into some trays at the bottom. We then have to separate the leaves from those hops with another machine. So let's just talk a little bit quickly about what brewers look at when they're buying hops. This has actually been mentioned several times, so I'm going to skip through it fairly quick. But they're looking for the best quality they can get. They would like to come out to your farm when they're not busy and actually see how you're growing them. And more importantly, they're going to want to see how you're drying and packaging them, because they want to make sure they're clean. They want to know that you've got a scale. They want to know that you've got a moisture meter. Some of the things that you need to make sure that you can prove to them that you're producing a very good quality product. So what are they looking for? Well, a brewer initially they're used to looking at hops that are nice bright green. And the color isn't as important as most of the brewers think it is. You can have excellent quality hops that have some browning on them, and once they brewed with them, they would not be able to tell the difference. But they're used to buying hops that are nice bright green, even pellets that are relatively lighter green, and so that's something that we got to get past. But you just need to know that that's one of the things they look at. Dried properly, they've got to be down around 9 to 10% moisture. 12% or higher, even in a cooler, they're going to tend to start to mold. So you can't have the hops, when they're done drying, they've got to be down below 12%. They're going to look at aroma and the smell. They're going to want to know, does this Cascade that I just bought from you doesn't smell the same as Cascade that I'm used to getting from Washington State or from Oregon. They've got to brew with it. So they've got to do a test brew and see what it's like. And the lab analysis has been mentioned several times. Alpha, beta, hop storage index, and total oils, especially if you're doing aroma hops, the total oils is really important. If it's a larger brewery, they might want an oil profile, but you're not going to be providing that because you're not going to have 10,000 pounds of hops until you get much larger. So it won't be worth your time to have an oil profile done on 50 pounds of hops at a time. So these are the factors that we need to be considering in the quality of the hops. Light exposure, heat, and oxygen. All three of those things are going to degrade the hops. So everything that we do in the processing and handling of those hops has to do with reducing those three things. We don't want to dry them in a greenhouse. I can't tell you how many times somebody has told me, well, I got an empty greenhouse that time of year. Why can't I put all of the hops in there? They'll dry really fast. It's not going to cost me anything. I'll just lay them in the sun. Well, then what are you going to do with it? They want to dry them right on the vines, leaves and all. What a mess. What a mess. So the last thing you want is excessive heat and certainly no light. So you're going to be drying in the dark, and oxygen, again, is the enemy of the hops because as soon as those hops start to oxidize, they're degrading. Out west, this is what a drying facility would look like, and they'll pile them as much as 3 feet deep. This is where I think we have some advantages because our dryers can be much smaller. This particular grower had 600 acres of hops in. He's now got 1,200, and he has to build a whole nother building like this in order to be able to do that because the varieties are so compressed as far as when they're going to harvest them. There was no way that he could do 1,200 acres of hops in the same facility. This is where, like I said, we have an advantage because our dryers do not have to be this large. We can pile them 6 inches or a foot or 18 inches deep if we want, and we'll use less heat to dry them. As I said before, drying should be within a half an hour. Only harvest what you can get done that next day, and down to 8-10% moisture. Before you bale anything, anybody drying and baling any hops or compressing them at all yet? Not yet, okay. Hops, when you dry them, you'll notice that if you use a moisture meter, you'll notice that they'll feel dry. The moisture meter may even say that they're dry, but the hop cone itself has bracts on the outside, and they're like feathers. They dry very quickly. The center of the hop cone is called the strig, and that is full of moisture. So in that, you'll dry the cones, and you'll say, well, that feels ready. But there's a lot of moisture right down in the center, and as they sit, and you put that into a bale, now that moisture content is really above 12%, and they're going to tend to mold. They might even overheat and start a fire. So it's very important to make sure they're fully dry. Yeah?
Steve, could you comment on drying temperature?
Yeah, so the drying temperature, the less heat that we use, the better. Now the problem with that is on the East Coast, and especially here, you've got high humidity. So how do you dry something that's 80% moisture and get it down to 10% when it's 100% humidity outside? It's difficult. So you're going to use lots of air and a little bit of heat, but try to keep the heat that you're putting in there 120 degrees or less. Here, a lot of people will say, well, even less than 100, but that may not be practical because if the humidity is high enough, you've really got to have some heat in there in order to draw that moisture out. Hot air holds more moisture than cold air, so that's the way by putting some warm air in there, it'll actually draw the moisture out of the cones. For aroma hops, that's especially true. For high alpha hops that you're not as worried about the aroma, they'll put as much as 150 degrees Fahrenheit to do that because the alpha isn't going to be affected the same way the oils are. Fans, about 50 cubic feet per minute per square foot. So if you're making a dryer that's 10 square feet, you can figure that out. You've got to have a fan that can handle that capacity. If you use too much, what's going to happen is the air will blow right through the hops, and as soon as you get an empty space, what's going to happen? Air's just going to go through that empty space. It's not going to go through the hops anymore. So now you've stopped drying everything. All the air is going through this empty space. So you have to have them piled deep enough that there's enough weight that the hops won't blow out, but not so deep that the air isn't going through the pile evenly. So 6 to 20 inches deep is good. This is one of the dryers that we got. They're Wolf dryers that we got in Poland. They're kind of nice because they've got 3 tiers. And the hops come in at the top. Then there's another shelf. And you can see they've got like louvers here. The floors are ventilated. They've got holes in them and there's louvers. And so as the hops dry, you open the louvers up. They fall down to the next level and the next level. And you empty it out. With the bottom level is actually a drawer that pulls out. Pull out the drawer, you open it up, you dump the hops on the floor, and now you're going to condition them. And the conditioning is that process that I mentioned earlier where the hops are developing a more even moisture content through the entire cone and through the entire pile. It also helps get rid of some of the excess heat. So you don't go right from the dryer into a baler. They do need to come to room temperature and to, out west they leave them for as long as 24 hours of conditioning. We can't really do that. If we leave them too long, then what's going to happen? They're going to just come back up in moisture and you're going to have to dry them over again. This is a dryer that is homemade, just plywood box. You've got screen in the bottom and a fan blowing air into the bottom of it so that the hops are right about at this level. These are nice because you can, I've seen growers that have a small amount of hops. They might even put a divider between them and you can have different varieties in the same dryer at the same time. Again, gauge the fan based on your hops are up here on screening. The fan needs to be based on the square footage that you're going to be drying. This one I like was from the University of Vermont. They took an ostrich egg incubator and converted it over into a hop dryer, and there's 16 drawers. It's really nice. You can do multiple varieties at the same time, and it'll dry 800 pounds of hops in a course of about 8 hours or so. Doesn't use an awful lot of electricity or heat either. It's really, really pretty neat. The plans for that are online, and we've had several people build them. You can handle a half an acre or an acre, a couple acres of hops with this very easily. Baling, why do we bale them? It's very important. If you're going to be drying them, you've got to bale them before you pellet them. For storage, once they're baled, you're keeping the oxygen out so that they're not going to oxidize. You're reducing space. If you're going to be putting these in a freezer or a cooler, you're going to reduce the space that you're storing them. And then the packaging costs. If you've got a package that's this large, it's going to cost you a lot more for that Mylar bag than it will for a bag that's this size. So compressing them first before they go any place to be pelleted. Now, you may be selling whole leaf hops, and you can go directly into a package this way if you're going to be vacuum sealing them. Let's skip that baler. So in baling, it's very important not to overuse too much pressure. 150 kilograms per cubic meter. I'm sorry, I don't have it figured out into square feet, but I think it's somewhere around 500 pounds per cubic yard. If you have too much pressure, what's going to happen is the lupulin glands in the cones are going to burst. So you think, well, I'll just bale it as tight as I can get them. Tighter the better. That's not exactly true, because those glands will burst. Now that they burst, they're exposed to oxygen, and the oils are actually going to degrade much quicker than if you use a little less pressure. So don't overdo it. Trash compactor. The small growers in New York that got it when they got started, this is a Braun trash compactor that you have in your kitchen. Worked really well, and they can do up to about 10, 11 pounds of whole leaf right in there. So that was pretty nifty. UVM, again, has developed a small-scale baler based on using a wood splitter, so you can go online and get that too. Works well. I asked Janine about this, and I don't know about Virginia and North Carolina, but right now it seems like if you're processing hops, you don't really have to have any specific kind of state license. In New York, you do. It's not a big deal, but our ag department will inspect the place, make sure it's clean. You have to have potable water and all that. It's called a 20C license. That may eventually come here once you got a number of people. It's essentially the same kind of license if somebody's doing small-scale food processing. So pelleting, do I have a minute left, or am I too far?
A minute.
Okay, all right. So the whole thing with pelleting is that they're ground up first, okay? You grind them up, and that's the way the brewers want them. I'm not going to say too much about that because we're running out of time. I will say that there's essentially two grades of pelleters out there that are for the size the hop growers might use. This machine here is going to cost you $50,000 to $60,000 to grind it and pellet, and you can do 300 or 400 pounds an hour. The smaller pelleters that are out there, you're going to get a hammer mill and a pelleter, and they'll cost you somewhere less than $10,000 to get the two of them. But with that, you're only going to be able to do about 30 pounds an hour. Moisture meter is necessary in a good scale, and a vacuum sealer. Just like you would vacuum seal strawberries that are going to go in the freezer, they have a little larger scale, and they can be hooked up to a gas tank to do a nitrogen flush to get the oxygen out of the bag before you seal them up. And the Mylar bags you're going to find are pretty expensive. That's what the brewers want them in. They want them sealed, oxygen barrier bags. You'll find that's one of the reasons that hops that are in for home brewers are so expensive per ounce, is because of all the packaging is pretty expensive. Okay. We're going to have time later for questions, so I'd be glad to answer some questions later on this afternoon. And that's pretty much what I wanted to get covered at this time. It's a lot to do in a half an hour, but hopefully you got something out of it. Thanks.
I think that's a talk that we're going to have to repeat several times as we all move along. That's a lot to take in, and most of us aren't at those phases yet, so that'll come with time. So now we're going to go into some of this research that you've been hearing folks talk about, and we've got two researchers from Virginia Tech that are going to speak first, Sean O'Keefe and Ken Hurley. Then I'm going to tell you about a little bit of the work that we've done in North Carolina. And last minute, Holly Scoggins from Virginia was able to join us, and she's going to mention a little bit, probably about some of the surveys and stuff she's been involved in. Tell you a little bit about the extension end that we're bringing here from Virginia. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
she's pulling up the slides, my name is Ken Hurley. I run the wine, beer, distilled spirits, hops, anything else lab at Virginia Tech. It's an analytical lab set up to serve Virginia and initially the wine industry. And I'll go through a little bit of the history in just a minute. That's a slide I show at almost every meeting. It's just to show that the colors of wine are different based on the background, much like the flavor aroma of hops are different based on the background of what they're in. So, as I've stated, it's the Enology Analytical Services Lab at Virginia Tech. Usually when I talk about the lab, people want to see a picture. It's a lab in a university. Relatively unexciting except for the bottom right-hand picture where there were 51 wine glasses that were tasting. That was a long day. So people have been mentioning that it would help the researchers out a lot to go to your state governments and ask for support. And my lab is a prime example of that. So in 2005, 4 winemakers in Virginia went to the state enologist and said, we want a wine lab. He said, I can't help you. You could go talk to the department head. The department head said, I'm sorry, I can't help you, but you can talk to the dean. The dean said, sure, here's a whole bunch of money. Roughly $250,000. With the understanding that the lab would be self-sufficient and not receive any more funding from the university. And we had 2 years to do that. So in 2006, I just finished up a master's in biochemistry, and they decided to take a chance, and they hired me to start the lab. Now in 2007, I became certified as a wine chemist for the federal government. So the TTB, Alcohol, Tobacco, Tax and Trade Bureau, that's the regulatory agency where you have to submit labels to and do all the taxing on alcohol and cigarettes. They have a certification program, so the results that I put out from my lab are deemed the same as from their lab. So if you're a beer maker that's trying to export samples to other countries, if you need analysis, I can do that. It's the same as sending it to the lab. From what I've heard, our turnaround time is about 6 months faster than the federal lab. Usually next day for us. In 2011, I became certified for beer and distilled spirits as well. There is no certification for hops. In 2013, this is a prime example of just ask and maybe something will happen. Stan Driver and some other hops growers talked with Laura Siegel, an extension agent in Amelia County, Virginia, and she got my number and she said, could we do hops analysis? I said, sure. So we do analyze hops. We started, the request went in 2013. I purchased the equipment, did the qualifying. In 2014 is when we first started taking in samples. And so hopefully the hops growers that are in production, are growing right now, have received this. This is the form from last year. It shows how to submit samples and our general price. As you can see, we do moisture analysis, the hops alpha and beta testing. And we also offer the hop storage index. And that's one thing to consider. The person from Huguenot Hops stated that they sent samples to my lab and others. You have to be careful and look at how they're being tested. So I use the methods stated. Those are the standard American Society brewing chemist methods. There's a caveat to that. They have 2 different methods. I tend to use the hops 14 analysis. Other labs tend to use the hops 6. That's a completely different method. They don't overlap, and they try to give you the same data, but it's always just a little bit different. Now, using the hops 14 method, it should be almost exactly the same because that's a more standard method. And along with that, I'm a member of the ASBC and I take part in their check sample service. So once a month, I receive samples from the American Society of Brewing Chemists and I report my results of analysis back. And they don't yell at you if they're different. I haven't been yelled at yet. But they will let you know if yours are outside the standard deviation of the other member labs. There's a fair number of them. Now, so what do we do? These are the tests that we currently perform. Many people have mentioned moisture testing. That's a very important one. We do the moisture testing on hops, specifically hops 4B, which is not just putting in dehydrator and waiting. We use a vacuum oven because I run into the same problem on the small scale that you'll run into on the large scale. In our laboratory on a nice hot July day, we keep the lab air conditioned because of the equipment down to about 70 degrees, but the humidity is still up around 60 or 70%. I can't do analysis at that level. I have to use more equipment intensive method, which is 4B, which pulls a vacuum on it and dries the dry air. We prefer to do the Hops 14 method. For alpha and beta acids, it's much more consistent, but you cannot get the hop storage index in that method. So we also offer the Hops 6A, which is a spectrophotometric method. And we also can do the isomerized alpha acids and beta acids. It's very similar to the non-isomerized. Starting this year in 2015, please don't send me samples tomorrow to do this. We will do the Hops 13, which is the total essential oils analysis, and the Hops 17, which is the essential oil profile. And I'll get into that in a little bit. So, but the important thing is the hops growers, what can we do for you? This is your chance to ask that state agency that people think tends not to listen. We're here. Send me an email with what you need. I can perform almost any test. I was late coming here yesterday because an extension or a ABC agent asked if I could measure the amount of alcohol in donuts. That was a 45-minute phone call. And the answer was yes, I can. And so on Monday, I'm going to go buy donuts and take my cheap vodka and syringe. Have fun with it. So if you need testing, whether it's you're a brewer, a hops grower, if you make wine, cider, distilled spirits, we can do all those tests. I'm also fortunate that my wife works in IT, so she gave me the email address, hops@dt.edu. I also have wine, beer lab. Cider was already taken by some other group. Distillation, I have all those. So let us know what we can do for you. We're here to serve the industry. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the samples that I received in 2014. So it was our first year starting. I don't know if everybody got that flyer, but we'll do better this year. I only received 20 samples. I shouldn't say only, that's a pretty good sampling for our first year. And we got samples from 16 hop yards, and 15 of those samples were cascades. On all those, I did the Hops 4, the moisture analysis, and the Hops 14, the acids profile. And all those results, I think there was one where they never sent us an email address. The results were reported by email, so that took about 4 days. But all the results were reported either the same day I received samples or the next day. Pretty quick. The results are reported as received. So if you send me wet hops, you'll get your alpha level, your acid levels based on the wet hops. Those are going to be lower than for dry hops. So we also put it on the dry weight. And that is not the 10% moisture basis, that's the 0% moisture basis. So of those 20 samples, 8 were fresh or wet hops. So the moisture was between 77 and 83%. 12%, you're going to see, you see a lot of signs where people put the quotes where they don't need to be. I put the quotes for dry hops because people told me they were dry, but they're definitely in quotes. So the 8 to 8.5% literature value where you want the hops to be, none were there. 8 to 12% of the dry hops, hops, 3 samples of the hops were in that 8 to 12% range. 3 samples were just a little bit above that 12 to 13%. And the other 6 were in the 13 to 67% moisture range. One person just asked for the acids only. I said, we do the moisture too. He said he didn't want to pay for it. I had just come back from Las Vegas, so I said, I'll bet you. I'll do the test. If it comes out higher than 12%, he would have to pay for it. If it was in the range, I would pay for it. I did not lose that bet. I think he was in the 67. So, again, we did the moisture and the acids analysis. It was on 15 samples, and I need to highlight that this is not enough samples for statistics or publication. I'm currently working on a PhD. If I only have 15 samples and I try to publish that data, not let me graduate. So this is just initial data. It's a basis for research. So on the alpha acids, the average number that I got was 6.75, with a range of 5.45 to 8.51. That fits within the range. The Pacific Northwest published values are 4.5 to 7%. Beta acids, 5.3, range 2.48 to 7.94. Again, it's right within the range of hops grown elsewhere. And again, highlight, not enough for publication, so don't go write book on this. And what we found was that although our acids levels were the same, the cohumulone as a percentage of the alpha acids was lower. So what that means is the alpha acids were the same, the cohumulone was lower. Cohumulone is that harsh bitterness that people don't necessarily want. It's not, the adhumulone and N-humulone, that's the pleasant bitterness that we want.
Can you say that's compared to Pacific Northwest? Okay.
So in the Pacific Northwest, the cohumulone level is 33 to 40% published. Ours ranged in 28 to as high as 31.2, but still fully in different ranges. And if you go with the average, it's about 20% less cohumulone, but still the same level of bitterness there. So what looks to be a better quality bitterness. And me being a chemistry person, I had to show these. And there was a book, Brief History of the Universe. For every equation you show, you lose 25% of your audience. I have two. So if you look at these, what are the differences? Real quick, anybody? It's right here. And then again, the only difference between N-humulone and adhumulone, you're never going to see that published because it's so hard to separate. This little arm gets moved down one. Well, it turns out that we can actually separate that, so we're going to be working on that this year to see how much different they are. But again, the humulones are a pleasant bitterness. The cohumulone is a harsh bitterness, and from what we've seen, hops grown in Virginia have the same amount of bitterness, but more of that pleasant bitterness and less of the harsh bitterness. So, I guess I keep repeating myself, but the cohumulones are lower, and this is something that we hope that we can put out there as we get in more samples to help you sell your products. But again, highlighting, don't publish. So what we're also getting into this year, as I stated, for 2015, are the aroma profiles. We started the lab in wine in 2006. We know that terroir, the region, geology, geography, growing season, all impacts those flavor and aromas. And we're fairly confident that we're going to see huge differences because the acid levels are so different as well. So as high acid varietals become available for bittering, flavor and aroma hops will become desirable and specialized. And again, the difference, what we've already seen, should carry over to the aroma, flavor and aroma content. And so we'll offer this aroma profiles. For the total essential oils, it's $25. Essential oil profile by GC is $90. This is not going to be a fast test. To analyze one sample, a single sample for both of these will take a full 8 hours. 2 samples will take 9 hours. It's a very labor-intensive and time-intensive process. But those other analyses that people want, moisture, and alpha and beta acids, we can have available same day or usually by the next morning. So the essential oil profile will have these standard components. Again, these are all ASBC methods of these compounds. We don't go outside of those methods because if you do send it to another lab, it should carry over. But we'll be able to report percentages based on that. And this is definitely an exciting time for the industry. Preliminary data shows a definite and positive difference. We hope to be able to publish more of this information. And again, to reiterate, Virginia Tech's motto is a prism that I may serve, and it's also the future. Let us know what we can do for you. Virginia State University has a representative here, Lynn Ruto. NC State, of course, with Janine, and Appalachian State with their fermentation sciences program and the knowledge lab. We're all here to serve. Let us know what we can do. In closing, that's Sean's slide. The background for all these is hops. I'm the dreaded backyard grower. That picture is actually the hops I grow in my backyard. So I'm there with you.
Thank you, Ken. One of the things
want to notice is that his lab runs on a cost recovery basis, so they don't generate a profit at the end of the year. It's supposed to charge exactly what it costs them to run those assays. So you get pretty much the lowest possible cost you can get on any type of analysis. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Sean O'Keefe. I've been at Virginia Tech for about 15 years now. I've been brewing beer since 1981, and that's been quite some time. And if you actually look back since '81, all of the craft breweries, with the exception of Anchor, were started around that time or later. So in '81, that's really the very early primordial stage of the craft brewing industry in this country. And at the time, I was living in Halifax and from Nova Scotia in Canada, and we couldn't buy something like yeast. You get dry yeast that's for wine. Brewing very early, I sort of got distracted. I went to Iowa State and got working on soybeans and flavors and soys. But my area of interest is in flavors, and that's analyzing the individual chemical compounds that are found in different samples. So in those regards, we end up working sometimes with big soda companies, and they're interested in how the package might interact with the flavor in their product, because things like can linings or the polymers inside any type of plastic package can interact with and change the flavoring in the product that's inside there. So when we look at my lab, I'll just show you a couple of things that I do in my lab. We analyze the chemical constituents that are existing in food samples for flavor. Now this is what's called a flavor wheel. I just turned that off. That's a flavor wheel, and this was developed by a scientist at the Stroh Brewery in Detroit, back when that was the third biggest brewery in the country. This is a design to try and sort of characterize all of the possible aromas in beer. Right? So hops are only contributing a small component of this sort of universe of flavors. Some of them are positive. They get a malty flavor, get a wordy flavor, or something like caramel. Some of them are quite negative. Diacetyl, fatty acid, rancid, oily. You get catty or cat urine aromas in here sometimes. So some of them are obviously skunky because of the prenol mercaptan that's produced by light in the presence of isovalve acids. But these are all descriptors that we would use to describe components of the flavor. Right? So if I say, okay, it's skunky, what's that mean? You know, I teach a lot with students in Taiwan, and when I go there and say, I want to tell you what Limburger cheese smells like, and they say, okay, tell me what it smells like. It's like, well, it smells like Limburger cheese. What else smells like that? So I needed to, because they have not smelled that or tasted that cheese. But I can tell them it tastes like tofu, which is stinky tofu. And stinky tofu smells like Limburger cheese. Or the other alternative descriptor is dirty diaper. I mean, one of my students tried to describe a flavor as puppy fart. I'm like, well, okay, but for my research, it's not necessarily the descriptors that I'm interested in. It's the individual chemical constituents that give those aroma compounds, or give those characteristic aromas. So for skunky, it's prenol mercaptan. You know what the structure is. It's the same as the skunk makes, and it's produced as an off aroma in light struck beer. But for the most part, most of these other descriptors are going to be a result of individual chemical compounds that are present in the samples. So from the standpoint of hops, we talk about terroir, or how is it different, or is it different dried versus frozen versus fresh, wet. You know, we can actually go into my lab and quantify the chemical compounds that are causing those aromas that we describe with these attributes like wordy or skunky or catty. This is one of the techniques we use called solid phase microextraction, or SPME, or some people call it SPME. And it's a little fiber that we have that's got a coating on the bottom of it. There's a fused silica with a coating on it, and this will absorb flavor compounds. So I will expose this fiber to my hop sample or wort sample or beer, whatever, and the flavor compounds will be absorbed by this. And this is part of an auto sampler, so I can run more than one sample at a time I guess I took out the other, but it's one on the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer that separates the individual compounds, helps identify them and quantify them. So that instead of just saying, well, skunky, grassy, or other aroma descriptors, we can actually go in and quantify the compounds that cause us to detect those aromas. That's one of the things that I'm going to be working on this summer. A number of the people talked about funding, and Janine and I and Holly and Ken have been trying to get money because we need to hire people to do the work, because most of us have very little time extra. But in the fall, though, I usually have a lot of students who are interested in volunteering to do research. And many of them, when you say what's going to be in hops or beer, they get double excited, and the amount of hours they want to work every week it goes up markedly. Tomorrow I'm going to Munich, and we're going to look at a Isa Huber 2.5 hectoliter brew system, a brew house. And there's 2 skids. It's going to come in with the brew house on one side, the fermenters on the other. We'll actually have 4 fermenters. And that should be coming the end of April, and we should be brewing with it in May of this year. So we're really excited about this because it gives us a small batch way of testing hops or barley or other things in actual beer samples to determine whether or not the quality is good. The other thing, we're having a mini malting system coming in as well, and this is going to be here this spring, and that allows us to malt barley and look at aspects of quality and brewing characteristics of different barley varieties that are being bred primarily for feed use, but we're going to be able to get some data on whether or not these varieties are going to have really good characteristics for brewing. That's all I have. I know we're on a little time budget here. Did you want to come up now, Janine, or did you want Holly to come up again?
While she flips over the slides, I'd like to mention that Virginia Tech also has the soil testing lab to do these soil tests before you start planting, has been mentioned. We also have a water testing lab. I didn't include their contact information, I'm sorry. If you'd like those services, just send me an email, hops@dt.edu, and I'll make sure that you get in contact with the appropriate people. That's right. The extension agents will also have connections to do the tissue analysis, and we'll bring all that together for you.
And we have